ETA Scythe of Dawn, 6 hours 25 minutes and 14 seconds. David, the enemy ship has been rendered non-operational, readings indicating that its main reactor is offline, and 2 of its 3 prime lift thrusters are destroyed. Gavi said. Alaris hail Alpha and verify. David said over his shoulder. Right away. She said back. David, the last shuttle of civilians is about to take off. The Duchess said by his left. Good. Then load up the ground teams that are still in the base camp, David said back as he made a connection to the captain. Captain, I need the walls closed again in 10 minutes. Right, the captain said after a second. Janris, have the packs that are fighting fall back into the base, David called right after. On it. Alaris, tell Fire Team Bravo and Charlie to close on the base opening and hold the line just outside of it, David said quickly. Then turned to look at J-Lock. Have the Jiao Anarm fall back to Sector 13. We are going to evac them next. I'll try, said J-Lock. ETA Scythe of Dawn, 6 hours, 15 minutes, and 37 seconds. David, the last ground team is away. We have leftover shuttles. What should they do? The Duchess said. Sector 13, tell them to get the Jiao Anarm forces out of the theater, David called back. Alaris, how far is Alpha from the ground base? Still about half an hour at most. Hearth says they need to recharge their jump cells. Good, we may win this yet, David said as he looked up at the display. His fire teams were doing their jobs, but their ammo is all but depleted, and their vitals show they will need a rest soon. Alaris, tell the fire teams that they are allowed to go into assault profile as soon as they are out of ammo, David called over his shoulder. Right, she called back. ETA Scythe of Dawn, 5 hours 51 minutes and 0 seconds. David watched the display. The Jiao Anarm forces were slowly being evacuated in groups of 50, but all the shuttles are hauling as fast as they can. The issue is that the Jiao Anarm don't have void suits, so the ship has to completely close the hangar before letting them out and into the ship. Slowing their speed. His 2 fire teams had depleted their ammo completely now and had engaged in assault, a brutal melee fighting that has them use their rifles' bayonets or combat blades. Some of them had specialty weapons like Samantha and her spear or Hearth and his poleaxe. David had a greatsword when he was in the army, but that didn't matter. David, Alpha is 10 minutes away. They are jump-capable again, Alaris called out. Have them close from the north and tell Bravo and Charlie to guide the enemy forces north. David called back. His eye watches the enemy. They are still fighting, and the readouts for his fire teams were showing some injuries. Lucky hits in melee, most likely, but the suits are feeding the soldiers a good cocktail of combat drugs to keep them fighting. ETA Scythe of Dawn, 5 hours 40 minutes and 43 seconds. The enemy is down to about 300 now, but it was mostly vehicles, which is a bit of an issue, as aside from Hearth's team, they were all out of anti-armor weapons or ammo. David, Charlie Lead says the enemy wishes to speak with you. Alaris called out behind him. David wasn't sure what that man wants, but it will give him time. Duchess, have Firebat get more ammo for the fire teams and have her do a low drop for them. She knows what that is. He said before turning to Alaris and nodding. Patching in now. Alaris said, This is David Solomon. What is it, Emberheart? David said carefully with a growl. David, my fellow son of Terra, I have noticed that you are evacuating all the Xenos, but you left your fellow humans on the ground. David could imagine that man smiling like a crazy zealot as he spoke. I have to admit you have me in a bind. You have bested more than 70% of my cohort, and you are still fighting, and these angels you unleashed are a true sight to behold. So how about a ceasefire? You can have the rest of the Xenos and your angels back, and I get back to my ship and leave. How about you surrender completely, and I don't have my fire teams destroy you? I told you that I was offering the olive branch when you reached the campsite. I told you that was the last kindest thing I would do for you. Your ship is damaged beyond operational, and you have just under 300 men left, and I can still resupply my men. You can't even if you retreat, David said in a careful and measured tone. My men will hound you all the way back, and then we'll hit harder. You aren't leaving that planet unless it's as a prisoner of war or a body bag. I'll give you 30 minutes to decide. David waved his hand to Alaris and exhaled slowly out his nose, the sound causing a few to shudder at the force behind his breath alone. ETA Scythe of Dawn, 5 hours, 20 minutes, and 30 seconds. David, we have an incoming ship. It just showed up where the gravitational signature was, the captain called over the intercom. Have you hailed them? David asked quickly. He was still waiting on Emberheart's surrender, but that man will likely want to die fighting, it seems. Doing so now, I'll patch it into the command center, the captain called back. This is the RHS Scythe of Dawn. Admiral Arata Suzuki, are you the ones that called the North Star? Came a voice out of the speaker. Yes, Admiral, I am David Solomon. I had been given command of an escalating situation on the planet we are in the atmosphere of. A faction calling themselves the Holy Empire had attempted to exterminate the native population. About 2 days ago, they came back with an occupation force and began to attack the natives and members of this vessel during search and rescue operations. However, we have, through the fantastic effort of the crew and natives, held them back. I was, however, forced to let monsters loose and allowed the use of X-weapons, and the day is near one. The enemy commander has been offered terms, and I am awaiting his response. David carefully explained, his voice breaking a bit at the thought his action had done. I see. So the IFFs we are seeing on the ground are your combat teams, and the unknown life sign south of them? The Admiral said after a minute. The enemy force, sir, David said back. And all the natives are safe? The Admiral asked, almost like he wanted to know something else. The last 200 will be brought aboard in the next 10 minutes, sir. However, the natives have shown a strong desire to keep this world. They are east of my men, sir, David said back. His tone was a bit harder. I see. Well, have your combat teams stay where they are. I am deploying one company to support them. Also tell them to join channel frequency 19C, said the Admiral after a few seconds of silence. And David, when you get back to Earth, you will be summoned for breaking laws 17 and 12 of allowed extrasolar activities. Scythe of Dawn out. David looked to Alaris, happy to see her doing what the Admiral said already, however. His mind chose now to give up its ongoing struggle for control, and the world went dark. His last sight was Alaris's face showing concern, one that was fearful for her love. David's eyes snapped open. The battle. He didn't get a surrender. As he rose up, he was forced back down by Alaris, as she threw more weight against him in an effort to keep him down, a successful one, as David noticed he was in his cabin. What happened? Did we win? He asked as his hand found his eyes and carefully rubbed them. He heard her draw a deep breath in before she spoke. Yes, we won, and it is mostly thanks to you. Her voice was hesitant, like there was more for him to know and something she didn't want to share. Emberheart didn't surrender, did he? David asked, the fear he had, a possibility in her voice. No, he didn't, she said as she pushed her face against his chest. Whatever she witnessed after he passed out was painful to her. I am sorry you have to witness that side of humanity, David said as he carefully and gently stroked her hair, her tears soaking into his undershirt. Humans can be remorseless and savage, but we try not to be. We don't want to be, but our homeworld is not a forgiving place, and that level of malice is needed sometimes to survive. He kept his voice as calm and remorseful as he could. You really are titans of destruction, aren't you? She asked, her voice muffled and claws poking on his skin. Only if we have to be. We will seek every other path before we do what we did down there, David said as he started to rub her back. I tried to get Emberheart to abandon his mission. I offered him the chance to leave and then to surrender. I did what I could, but he had more love in his nation than his life, and the Admiral did what he had too. But the Zhao on-arm will have their homeworld back, and the community will have more help coming soon. He brought her head up so he could see her face. It was still twisted with pain and fear, her tears cutting lines down her fur. But we did what we set out to do. We saved the Zhao on-arm and protected their planet, and we did so in as morally acceptable way as we could. Do not forget that we could have abandoned them down there. Her visage shifted, rationality to his words, the hard truths he had spoken. He did give them a chance to run, he offered a chance for life, and he did everything he could have to avoid the bloodshed she had witnessed. His kind were truly monsters, but they will give everything to protect you. She wiped away the last few tears and swallowed hard, then pulled up to him. I know. It's just that I never thought that much violence would ever be necessary. Her eyes show an understanding of who he is, and an acceptance of how far he would go to protect. You are my Kusafane, and I am proud of you, and your efforts to avoid this outcome, she said before leaning in and kissed him. They held the kiss for a second longer before they broke, the embrace giving each a show of the other's affection. So, how long was I asleep for? David asked, as he pulled a lock of her silver hair to the side. About 10 ship hours. Angela had taken over getting your team patched up, and the Scythe had helped to get all the Jawan down planet side again. They are setting up housing for them too, and search and rescue efforts are back up and running, Alaris said, and rose into a sitting position on him. Also, the Duchess and the Captain want a word when you are awake, and Jaylock says you are to go down and meet the Jawan leadership. Also, the Admiral said you are to contact him when you can, but before we leave the system. David threw his head back and let out a groan. His wish was to sleep, but his body told him that he had enough for now. Okay, I'll get to all of that later, he said as he looked back up to her face, then shifted and looked at her core. But more importantly for me, are you okay? And is the child still safe? His hands coming to a rest on either side of her. Yes, I am fine. A bit shaken, but fine. And the child is still there and growing. The check I did about 2 hours ago showed that the growth rate is like that of a human, so the doctor said this will be longer than my time with Kiga, but I am fine and ready, Alaris said back, as her hands clasped his, and her face shifted from happiness to a contentful smile. Now come on, you have things to do. First up, Medi Center. Your wounded teammates will want to see you. She got off him and pulled him up as she moved. They aren't getting many visitors. Everyone is scared of them? David asked as he got to his feet, taking a second to remember what standing feels like. Yes and no. The captain said you should be the first to visit them, as you are their commander, Alaris said before handing him his jacket. Oh, that makes more sense. Larishi's code of conduct. The commander is meant to visit his wounded and thank them for their hard work, David said as he slipped the jacket on and sat down to get his boots on. Yeah, I figured it was something like that, she said as he stood and she slipped on his visor. I also got this for you to give them. She turned and gave him a small bag filled with random foodstuffs, so you can show anyone watching how humans take care of each other. Thank you, my wonderful Zanno, he said as he kissed her again while taking the bag. They will love it, but I'm going to make sure they know it was you that did this. Why? She asked, a bit confused. Because it will show them you care too, he said back before taking her hand and headed for the door. David could hear them before he walked in. It sounded like Rick and Riggs along with Kowalski. The three were all sitting near, but out of bed on some of the seats playing a game on one of the terminals. Well, it's good to know you guys aren't hurt that bad. I guess I'll come back later, David said as he walked up behind them, making all three look at him a bit surprised. There was a second of silence before Rick seemingly woke up. Yeah, 2 of them got lucky and got under the plates on the side when we had to switch to assault, Rick said and lifted his shirt where a large bandage had been placed. Ha! You got hit by knives. The idiot that hit me had an axe and thought he would cut my arm clean off, Kowalski said and showed off a bandaged arm. Too bad for him the axe didn't get far. Too much past the blade. Yeah, well, you 2 lucked out. The 3 dicks that rushed me tried to impale me with a spear. I mean, where the hell did it even come from? Riggs added, and pointed at his leg, which was bandaged heavily. Well, looks like you will all have new marks to add, and new stories to tell. David extended his hand, holding the bag to them. This is from Alaris and me. A thank you for your hard work. Also, you may get others coming in and thanking you. Don't be stupid and be respectful. Remember that they may see you as monsters or saviors. It will vary. The 3 gave him a quick nod and started splitting what was in the bag before Rick looked up and passed David to the door. Thanks, Alaris. These are great, he called out. David took that as his cue to leave and gave them a wave and headed over to Alaris as they both headed off to his next meeting. David walked into the bridge of the ship. It was mostly empty, save the 3 individuals over by a system display on the hollow table behind the captain's chair. 2 he recognized immediately, and the 3rd was the Admiral. He was sure about it. His sharp features were more prominent due to the intense workout regimen he undertakes, and his uniform was a clean, all-white uniform of the Admiralty of the Republic, complete with a pointed hat tucked under his arm, his hard and deep green eyes that watched David as he walked. A carefully maintained marine cut of black hair made a tattoo on the side of his head visible, one that told he was once a pilot for the fighter squadrons. "Captain Duchess Admiral David Solomon reporting as requested," David said as he came to attention beside them. "So, you are David Solomon," the Admiral said and walked up with an extended hand. "I was expecting something else from what I read from the reports of Exonauts Combat Corps. Sorry, extenuating circumstances caused some changes from when I was Earthside, sir," David said back and shook the Admiral's hand. "Well, you remembered your training and drills. I am compiling my report to Earth, and I have also concluded a small investigation of the event on—" The Admiral stopped for a second and found the word, "John Cool. All the evidence shows that you did your best to protect humanity's standing, and you chose, when your back was to the wall, to stop holding back. When you have a hearing about you breaking our laws, be sure to call me to be a witness." The Admiral smiled for the first time since David saw him. "You have done the hardest thing for any man to do, and you did so under immense pressure. Good job." "Admiral, I do have a question. How did you manage to arrive early?" David asked with a smile. "Oh, well, our slip jump was calculated. We had inadvertently ended up on the shadow trail left by your ship. It allowed us to shift more power to the drive," the Admiral said and let out a laugh. "Too bad it was for naught, but I am happy we got here. The enemy ship is one of the ships marked as missing from around the community." David cocked a brow at the Admiral. "Which one?" he asked hesitantly. "Oh, the Dreamer's Rest," the Admiral said. "David, I wanted to apologize." The Duchess cut in, her hand gripped together tight. "I was scared and panicked, and I remembered that you had been in your people's army, so I gave you command, and in doing so placed a heavy burden on you, so I am sorry for abandoning my role as leader of the expedition." Her voice soft and scared, like a child fearful of an angry parent, and the inevitable scolding they will get. David watched the Duchess for a second and let his expression soften before speaking in a soothing tone. "Duchess, you had the responsibility of protecting the expedition, and in a moment of fear and anxiety you chose from among your command someone you believed could protect everyone. You have nothing to apologize for." He placed a hand on the Duchess's shoulder. "But you had to stay awake for so long and had to break your laws to save the planet. That is all my fault," she said back, her eyes pleading for him to accept her apology. "No, Duchess. I stayed awake for that long because I knew I had to oversee the implementation of the plan I had," he said back, maintaining his conviction in his actions. "And I broke my people's laws so that no more lives were lost. If I had those decisions again, I would make the same choices. I swore to perform my duties without failure, hesitation, or favoritism, and I meant it." The captain let out a few squawks at David's words. "See, my dear, he doesn't regret his choices. He merely wishes to do his job, a soldier, true and true," the captain said and walked up beside the Duchess. "David, I must say that you are very much the man your dossier says of you, and as much as I would like to turn a blind eye to you breaking our law, I will have to report it all the same. However, I think I'll add in the fact that you did exactly what any other former or active member of the Republic's armed forces would be expected to do given the circumstances," the Admiral said before placing his hat back on. "I do have to get back to my vessel. I recommend that this vessel goes back to its normal operations and orders. I'll need to set up for the reinforcements of the Empire." He gave them a quick salute and strode out of the room. The three of them watched him leave. He was very much what you would expect from the Admiral of a battleship. "I understand you both wanted to see me too," David said before turning his attention back to the Duchess and Captain. "Yes, David." The Captain started and trailed off for a second, his mind evidently racing for words. "I was hoping you could address the crew more than a few saw what your Admiral and the fire teams did down there after the Scythe arrived, and well, they are scared." David raised his hand to silence the captain and walked to the terminal on the hollow table, punched in his code and opened a channel throughout the ship and to the few ground teams. "Hello, everyone. "This is David Solomon," he said in a calm and soothing voice. An eagerness of understanding and forgiveness carried on tone alone. Some of you had seen the worst side of humanity, a side that is savage and brutal without remorse. But I would remind you of two things. The first is just as important as the second, but they are something you should remember. The first is humanity's seat on the council. We are on the diplomatic block because we value peace and have an immense amount of compassion for living beings. We hate war and the act of killing as a horrible thing to do. The second thing is this. I am the only one responsible for the event that unfolded down there. I had done all I could to get the enemy to surrender, but he chose not to because he didn't want to. And my men, the members of the human contingent that had been involved in the event, didn't want to do it. None of them relished or enjoyed the act. But that is how humans deal with threats to our friends, and every one of you is a friend to the humans on board this vessel, so do not fear, for we will give our all, only in defense of you and this vessel. Thank you for listening. I suggest that you all seek out the humans on this vessel and talk with them. We aren't monsters unless we absolutely have to be. David disconnected, then turned to the Duchess and Captain. That should work. If you will excuse me, I understand the Jiao Unarmed leadership wants to speak with me. Briefing room 5 was the meeting point, and David walked in to see his first Jiao arm, and they were exactly what he had heard, just about 4 feet long, with only 1 foot behind their legs in the form of a wide tail. They did indeed look like the vil anise, but with spiky scales that pulled away from them at some points, like above the eyes, under their mouths and the joints. There were 4 in the room with J-Lock, and they all turned to face David as he walked in. None seemed shocked by his size or form, so they must have seen his team on the ground. J-Lock gave a happy tail thump on the table as he walked in. "Joyce Hayes, David Solomon, Kiagran Human, Guadrim Jewel," he said to the Yao Arms. "This is David Solomon, the human commander and war leader of victory." The 4 of them watched J-Lock as he spoke, then turned back to David, studying him closely. Before one of them spoke, "Hayale Nadam? Diaznarad Hayale? Yadbars Wadrim Hayale?" She wants to know why you fought so hard, why you gave all you had, why try to avoid such a victory, J-Lock said a second after. Because humanity as a whole cares deeply for all life, especially if our own caused the suffering, and when it came time and all my options to resolve this was gone, I did what the Republic of Humanity does best, and I became a protector, David said back and nodded at J-Lock, causing the 4 to look to the vil Anis. Helai Hosmar, human honorm Kielabor, Indrag Iozen Diaclin Puaris, Hylok Quitra, human honorm Kolais Wikeam Kor, Jul Adiam Rawandwarm Wade, human arm San Kiakodin. J-Lock said slowly, and the 4 snapped back to David, and they each exchanged a glance and quick thumps of their tail before their leader took an extra step forward. She looked at David for a second before David squatted down so she didn't have to look up too much. "Shiadan Jau Anurm Ki Amor Ajaor David Solomon Jwalin Fiadr Wade Helifor," she said with a tone that meant this is an honor she was bestowing as her hands moved forward to present a medal of some kind. "On behalf of the Jawian people, hereby gift David Solomon the Medal of Great Sacrificer," J-Lock added. "I humbly accept," David said as he opened his hand and took the small medal. "I will wear it with pride." "Hi and Jadwin," J-Lock said, making all of them thump their tails with joy. "I'm sorry, but I have other matters to take care of, J-Lock," David said, making the 4 look to J-Lock again. "Yes, go, I'll take care of this," J-Lock said before looking to the Jiao arm and speaking. David didn't want to stay, so he left in a hurry. He had just remembered something he forgot to ask and hoped the scythe was still close, but he should find Angela first. She can get it set up for him.